All right. Welcome to AfterShox, the latest creation by the FTINFX group. I brought you Foxtrotting in a Foxhole, FTINFX the Scene, which should be out more than it actually is, but we're working on that. If you listen to Foxtrotting in a Foxhole, you've been hearing me say I'm going to go to some different platforms, get more content out there. We've been doing that slowly, working with my buddy SJ and the SJ Gets Down podcast. But now it's time for us to get this video thing going on. And this is what we call aftershocks. Kind of reacting to things that happen in between podcast episodes and real time and whatnot. Hot takes, lots of interviews, hopefully. Already got some good stuff in the hopper. Got episode 2 almost ready to release as well. So we're going to have 2 episodes coming out at the same time. This is the pilot episode. So bear with me because this whole concept is definitely still under construction. And so, yeah, we got our hard hats on. There's sawdust everywhere. And there's going to be some hiccups here, but bear with us. This is going to be some fun stuff that we have moving forward as we head into fall and the fun time of the year as far as being a sports junkie is concerned. And I'm sure we'll have some comments about other stuff as well. So buckle up. Here comes the pilot episode of AfterShox. Okay, so one of the things that I have brought up in recent podcasts is the absurdity with how the WNBA is being covered and the people who are doing it. You know, I'm all for empowerment. You all know I've been talking about the Queens of the Court long before it became vogue, since this podcast started. But I think it's interesting how you have, especially in the sports media, and this could be real journalists, talking heads, internet types like myself, but it's mostly middle-aged men who have some of these very psychotic takes. I mean, hell, we talked about it on the podcast. The Wall Street Journal wanting Congress to launch a civil rights probe into the treatment of Caitlin Clark, how she's been treated. It's worse than Jackie Robinson. You don't remember the National League getting chartered flights because Jackie Robinson came into the league. But that's neither here nor neither there. This is more about how psychotic it's gotten and all the conspiracy theories. I mean, good old Angel Reese. She had supposedly quit on her team. Then she comes back and is absolutely playing like a top 6 player, maybe a top 4 or 5 for that matter, with all those double doubles. But yet, these old hens and the sewing circle just, I mean, right? They give Jim Garrison a run for his money in terms of weaving conspiracies. And what did I read today? Caitlin Clark is being set up to fail by the league. I don't know. Didn't she just get a signature brand from Nike, which is going to be shoe, apparel, and that might be right. It's going to be the Caitlin 7, like the Kobe 7, and they're going to make lots of money. So, exactly. How is she being set up to fail? Somebody needs to really, give me a refresher course on that one. And, social media is a really interesting thing when it comes to the actual ballers. And then there is that weird line in between. Because like Sophie Cunningham, for example, I think nobody is going to argue that she's a ninja badass. But sometimes you wonder, Sophie, are you more interested in your tan or being Caitlin's enforcer? And we're not picking on her because we were really bummed when she got injured. But it's interesting when I think about my favorite pair of twins, the Haley and Hannah Cavender, how they decided not to do the rough and tumble NBA and just say, nah, man, we're going to be content creators. We're going to get enhancements and do our thing and have all the simps, throw money at us. Whereas you've got some folks down in the W who are like saying, hey, I could be hot, rock the runway, and still throw an elbow. Right? And it's real interesting because you sit there and you think, I've seen like Sabrina, our local hero here. She gets glammed up, but nobody's gonna sit there and go, she's not what I consider simp material, like Sophie and Lexi Hall, right? Those two, where people can't get enough of it. Even, the queen herself, CC22. Interesting times we live in. But this idea that we should have congressional investigations. Maybe even had a legislator come out and say, yeah, I think I'm going to establish a probe. I don't know what planet these people are on or what the hell they're actually thinking. It is competition. And this is the whole thing I keep bringing up on the podcast. What do you all think? They were going to make a golden lane, gold dust sparkles, covered with rose petals for her? I mean, if you're Audra Wilson, who MVP and is making a case to go back to back in that regard, as the Aces make a late charge for the title, or Miss Collier in Minneapolis, you're like, hey, she all right, she good, but so am I. And this idea, because arenas are being filled, eyeballs are tuning in, when CC22 is on the court, that these folks would just lie down and say, okay, we're just going to ride your coattails and you're going to get us paid and not get any props for myself. And most of the conversation, as I pointed out, is being driven by like middle-aged men. I mean, yeah, there's women that cover the sport. ESPN has its cadre of folks led by Elle Duncan and all the interesting personalities over there. Yeah. But they don't seem to factor into the bigger discourse when it comes to the queens of the court. I mean, hell, on Fearless, what is that segment? As the WNBA turns. All right, we'll let somebody else muse about that. What else do we got? Well, in episode 2, we're gonna have Alec Ford back. Always a pleasure to have him. He's been on Fox Trading on the Foxhole several times, and it's been kind of a hot minute. So we decided to have him, or I decided to have him on episode 2, talking about the NCAA and the NBA, of course, as we always do. But as pertains to the NCAA, we run up the whole thing with Michigan, as I've already mentioned. And we'll just call this segment Crime and Punishment, or the lack thereof. So basically, what you're telling me, you can be involved in a pretty odious scandal where you're flat out cheating, stealing signals, stealing signs. Spygate. Hey, Bill Belichick, what's up? Right. Whatever integrity is left of college football, you gotta throw it out the window. Because basically, you can show up with a wheelbarrow of cash, and since Michigan is in the Big Ten, that's part of the Big Two, the real cartel. Big wheelbarrows of cash, and the problem goes away. This ain't like the good old days where, like SMU, where you got the death penalty, or even when Miami was out of line, at the end of Erickson and Jimmy Johnson's tenure, and Butch Davis basically bore the brunt of it with scholarship reductions, loss of TV appearances, bowl games, or that sort of thing. Okay, new era. But shouldn't you, for something as harsh if compromising the integrity of the sport, shouldn't that warrant maybe a 1 year CFP ban or TV appearances and real scholarship reduction instead of like, here's a wheelbarrow of cash. I'll give a couple of superficial cuts to my wrist as far as what punishment should we get? How many scholarships and how many less trips can we take? I mean, it's pretty pathetic that we've gotten to this point in our desire for entertainment, recognition, and wanting to be cool. Be cool to your school. That we can sit here and say, okay, on to the next thing. What is the takeaway here for this ramble? If you are the big two, never mind the other two and the third conference, which we'll see what happens when they get in the room, because basically the other two conferences say, Big Ten, the SEC, that is, go get the Dunkin' Donuts and coffees, and someone else say, no, man, screw Dunkin', I want that to be some Krispy Kreme, bro. It's those two, SEC and the Big Ten. And moving forward, you can pretty much do what you want in impunity. Since you're making so much money, throw them a big cash, which maybe will help them, the NCAA, that is, get some funding to other programs. Shucks, I don't know. But why would you abide by anything? Just say, yeah, we'll just throw some money at it and it'll go away. Am I lying? Okay. What else do we have in this pilot episode? Hey, thanks for bearing with me. Like I said, we're still under construction, still figuring out how this is going to be. But like I keep emphasizing, we're about to throw down some fun content here and just have a blast. That's what life's all about. If you're not having fun doing stuff, then get out and start having fun when you're doing stuff. Okay, silly me. NFL's young guns. Why do I want to talk about the NFL's young guns? Well, the preseason concluded, and I know most folks have no regard for exhibition season. Like, yo, man, when can we get to the real games? But with all of these young quarterbacks that have appeared, I say the last 3 to 5 years or so, there are some compelling storylines. I mean, there's people holding out. That's always going to happen. But these young quarterbacks, whether they make the cut or not, and it's really interesting. It would take forever for the Brady, Rodgers, Mannings, as far as elite quarterbacks and that tier where we're like watching first things first. They're on Mahomes Mountain before there was even a Mahomes Mountain. And then Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar, Jackson sort of took the mantle from Brady. But it's really interesting that will their reign on top of the mountain last long with this stable of quarterbacks? Because as we've pointed out on the podcast many times, that's Fox running in the Foxhole podcast, kind of the difference between way back in the day and now is quarterbacks come into the league as finished product. Look at Bo Nix. Guy played for 8,000 years, it seems like, at Auburn and Oregon. Same thing with Jaden Daniels. Same thing with Michael Penix. Same thing with Cam Ward. These guys that went to multiple schools and come in the league at 23 and 24. They ready to play. And so you know pretty quickly whether you have a diamond in the rough or you got a stone cold buster or somebody who's going to bounce around the league, getting to know every clip book and the 32 cities. Hey, Sam Howell, how you doing? But it is interesting to see, how quickly or not if these kids live up to all the hype that's currently associated with them. And there's a lot of folks in that group. There are some folks right now where we're sitting there like going, Trevor Lawrence, put up or shut up. Justin Herbert, local kid, we love you, and nobody can find a bad thing to say about you other than you ain't getting it done in the playoffs. Even Trevor Lawrence is gonna say, "Hey, I beat you in the playoffs." I mean, right? Even though Josh and Lamar haven't won anything either, it's fair in the era of Mahomes. But Jalen Hurts says, "You need in the era of Mahomes." Yeah, I guess the fair question would be, of all the young guns, who do you think has the most to lose here? And I've been thinking about this long and hard. It should be kind of obvious, but maybe it's not. When you look, okay, let's start with Bo Nix, for example. Great rookie season. I've talked about his pedigree, Auburn, Oregon, coach's kid, gets with the quarterback whisperer coach and Sean Payton. But because of Caleb and JD5, Mr. Daniels, his wonderful season kind of slightly obscured, even though they made the playoffs. And the thing is, because of the hype with Mr. Daniels and Mr. Williams, I think he's going to get a pass. Nobody's really expecting a lot other than Denver defense is really good. And there are some people, especially Mr. Colin Coward, who feel they may be good enough to overtake the Chiefs, who've had a stranglehold over the AFC West, for this decade, pretty much. Mr. Stroud's interesting as far as the young guns are concerned. 2 playoff appearances, which is pretty good. Yeah, it's a chicken and dumplings division, but after the whole thing with Watson and everything else blew up, they were as much of a dumpster fire as the Commanders and the Panthers. And they turned that stuff around real quick. Fair to say. But yet, he somehow took a step back. I'm like, you took a step back and you went to the playoffs. And somehow, poor Bobby Slowick, he was the scapegoat. See? Told you, your wife's looking at you right now, Mr. Slowick, and saying, see, when you were a hot commodity, you should have jumped out there even if you weren't ready. Now, where are you? Does he become in that elite circle if they can make a deep run and surprise everybody? Because obviously, in that division, yeah, Jacksonville's going to be better, more flash with Mr. Hunter and whatnot. Get to Cam Ward in a second. But it's all poised. They could make a run given what they have on their roster, but nobody's really saying, well, Mr. Stroud's about to enter the penthouse as far as elite is concerned. Anthony Richardson, you'll be in the UFL if you're not careful before you can say Tony Dorsett. Right? JJ, I think everybody expects him to be a game manager. If he blows the lid off the kettle, okay, you're a national champion, just like Brady was at Michigan. It's meant to be, but sure didn't see enough. And he was hurt last year. Michael Penix Jr., kind of the same story. I mean, obviously had some trials and tribulations early in his career. Got the Huskies on a great run. Probably got the QB1 job in the Big Peach sooner than I thought it was going to be possible. But then again, it's Kirk Cousins. And I had my time with Kirk, so I shouldn't really be that shocked that Mr. Penix is at the controls. But once again, I feel like he's playing with house money. There's no real, hype there. He's on a strong team, lots of weapons. And so if he balls out, people will be great. Another one of those, like, all right. I think but Mr. Daniels, Washington, so over exceeded what anyone was thought was possible. Yeah, there were people, yeah, I thought they could have won. No, you didn't. Shut the blank up, okay? And so I think because Washington blew it out of the water so much, it's going to be really hard to say because if things level off for him because defensive coordinators and their library that's bigger than MGM figure out a way to contain them and they aren't as successful on fourth down, are we going to say that he's taking a step back? No, it all comes back to Caleb, especially since he's with Ben Johnson alert, Ben Johnson alert, Ben Johnson alert. You know, right. The 21st century Bill Walsh had been Johnson. Yeah, a franchise that, well, take away Sid Luckman and McMahon when he was healthy. Maybe Bill Wade when they won it in 63, but not a lot of highlights coming from the quarterback position. Are we lying? So I do feel that you get to the end of year two and it's still a rocky road, and as we've talked about in Fox starting in a foxhole, that's a very tough division. So even if he improves, it's not out of the realm of possibility. They could be a 6 or 7 win team. Okay. Yeah, I think he's got the most to lose. Cam Ward, I like his fire and determination and everything I'm hearing. I mean, crap. Anybody willing to take on people on the other side of the ball in your locker room wanting to go to fisticuffs, I mean, nobody's going to put your hand on the quarterback. We know that's taboo, but showing that kind of fire and intensity and being one of those guys who's first in the building, last in the building. You like what he's bringing to the table. You know, he's had an interesting journey from Incarnate Ward, Pullman, kicking it at South Beach with the Cavengers to now kicking it in Music City. So I just don't know about that team. You know, I'm always picking on the AFC South, like the Big 12, calling it a chicken and dumplings division. It's the eye test, bro. You know, when they prove me wrong otherwise, I'll admit it. But even the way things are, I just don't know if my crystal ball isn't seeing it for the Titans. Not in year two. Now, they may be one of these surprise stories. And in that division, you get the right amount of breaks. Sure. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if I was at Vegas, I wouldn't be putting my money on it. Okay. Where are we going next? Let's hit this one. Baseball's realignment, which is very, 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 very interesting. I was going to talk about this in the last podcast, but I decided not to. That I would save it for the pilot episode of AfterShox. Yeah, Mr. Manford, visionary. I don't necessarily know whether I agree 1,000% with everything that he does, but baseball, a game that, if you believe, you know, the folks who spin great tales, goes back to sometime in the 1830s or 40s, lasted a long time in pretty much the same form. Now, there are some things that started in the late 20th century into this century that probably were needed. Interleague play, great matchups, great fan interactions, you know, getting to see different stadiums, all good. Expanded playoffs, giving fan bases that were out of it a chance to being relevant at this point of the season, where in the old formats, not the case. As Casey, not Casey, but Connie Mack basically said, yeah, we're just paying, you know, we're just playing to pay the bills, especially when you're a cheapskate like he was. in the latter half of his tenure, long tenure at the Philadelphia A's. Okay, where are you going with it, Ken? Well, the idea of breaking up the NL and AL and realigning things geographically, this is a tough one. Because on a lot of fronts, it makes sense. More of the flavor you see in rivalry weekend, which are bringing back next year, which I thought was a hit, smart thing. Less wear and tear. Playoffs have a little bit more sparkle because it's more geographically based. All those things are good. But hey, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool NL traditionalist. I've always been one of these guys that's 1876, y'all. Forget about the junior circuit, y'all, 1901. You know, I used to love back in the day when the leagues had their separate rules. And in our league, pitchers had to face the music for their shenanigans. Unlike over there in the AL, which we used to call disco ball with all those garish uniforms and the DH and all that nonsense. Now that's all watered down, and I guess we're accepting it. That's why, well, it would bum me out to see history crushed that way, because baseball really isn't that broken that you have to do all these radical revisions. I mean, sorry, Mr. Manford, the uptick in baseball isn't because you decided to put a runner on second base in extra innings, not because you shaved 20 minutes off. Out of the pandemic, we've had a thirst for entertainment after being denied, and that thirst can't be quenched. And that's why MLB is growing, and fans watching it on the tube and people going to the ballpark. If you want it to, I get it, because I think expansion, which has been on the table for a while, or on hold for a while, and I could see anywhere from 3 to 6 teams getting in, then yeah, maybe it is time to break up the model and come up with something different along the lines of how the NFL and the NBA divisions and conferences are structured. Fine, especially when you're talking about cities like Portland, Salt Lake City, Nashville, or Memphis, or San Antonio, Sacramento. Possibility, like I said, to add 3 to 6 teams. And if that's the case, yeah, it would make sense. But if you're not going to do that, you're going to do it because this is one more thing to take the game forward. Stop fixing something that ain't broke, Commissioner Manfred. That's what I say. All right. Let's leave you with something light here. There's episode 1. Let me see a couple of things here. I think it's really cool. We've been talking about Sonny coming over from the Spurs to LAFC. The LA Asia connection once again. All you folks that don't realize, they think, oh, the ratings suck because they're woke. No, they don't care because they have so much money coming from Asia. And when you see what the Dodgers have done with Shohei, Sasaki, Yamamoto, just filling their coffers up. LAFC, some of the same people that are the Dodger ownership group are in LAFCs, and it's not surprising they went the same route. And lo and behold, Suns jersey is the top seller in all jerseys of any sport over the last couple of weeks. And this is an MLS player not named Messi. Can't count Messi. Messi's a deity, but Sun getting that traction, and that's just every time LAFC plays, whatever hour it is over in Seoul, bars are hopping, TVs are on. Just global, folks. It's why the EPL wants to play matches here, why La Liga does, and why Commissioner Goodell wants to play games on every continent. We talk about this all the time, folks. Tell your friends to tune into this, the regular podcast. It's cool stuff. Okay. I was sitting there thinking about On the regular podcast, I'm always talking. Nightfall of Diamonds, I start out talking about the hippie stuff. I mentioned earlier about the passing of the torch when it comes to the young guns with art with the present folks in the penthouse. I was sitting there thinking about in the hippie world, now with the Snooze Factory, aka Dead and Company, had a big summer, well, big year because they did their spear thing and celebrated the Grateful Dead's 60th with the party in the park. You got Fish. They're still doing what they do, but in spite of, what the Fish kids will tell you, that fire isn't quite lava like it used to be. Yeah, you can do tweezer 4 or 5 times, spurts through the show, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, it was so cool, the tweez." But you listen to the show and you're just like, "Yeah, this is '97." Then you got Bisco. You know Bisco is gonna be Bisco, but you have to know that if you're a Bisconaut like I am, Bisco gonna go back to being Bisco at some point, right? It's gotta happen. String Cheese does this, My Morning Jacket, and Government Meal. And I'm just sitting there wondering, because like last weekend, I should have gone out to Matthew Knight, not to see the show, because I'm not into silly brings, aka Billy Strings. It's not my jam, although I've got respect for the dude, and, what he's done for the scene and all the people are following. I would have been out there to check the scene out, but it was like 97 degrees, man. I'm just like, nah, man, I'm gonna watch LAMC and my nice cool Gasa and not deal with it. But I think about them, Goose, Spapper, pigeons playing ping pong, and all sorts of, weird indie acts that somehow get lumped in with the hippies. And I just wonder, has the torch really been passed there? Because Billy Strings playing MKA, it's like, wow, okay, that's pretty big. I figured it'd be at the Cuthbert, for us folks locally, the amphitheater, as opposed to the arena where the Ducks play. For those of you outside of the world, not you carry like, why is he talking about this hippie stuff? Because I like to. But yeah, I don't know if the torch is completely passed, but it's in the process. Right? I don't, these other bands. I'm sure Bob, on his way to being senile, will find a way to grab a guitar and be the major domo. You gotta think Fish is probably gonna get bored again and want a hiatus. And like I said, Bisco gonna be Bisco at some point again. So yeah, I would have to say maybe 2 or 3 years, if not sooner, the torch will be fully passed, regardless of whether these bands are still on tour. All right, folks. If you want to be on the podcast, if Fox Running a Foxhole, or be a guest on this show, FTINFX at gmail.com. Call the hotline to say, hey, 541-525-0896. Love to hear from you there. Got a lot of good stuff going on. Like I said, we're going to release this episode and episode 2, which features a conversation with Alec Ford. Got an NFL preview, which we're going to start working on as soon as we're done with this. Some other cool stuff as well. I think the scene's going to be revived here as well. So exciting times. And also, check out the latest episodes of SJ Gets Down. She's doing fantastic stuff. Really fun to collaborate with her. All right, folks, this has been real. This has been tight and clean. Episode 1 in the books. More fun to come. See you all soon.